Right. Oh, hey, I'm so grateful to have you here. This is a space for deep thinkers, emotionally intelligent leaders, and sensitive high achievers who are done with surface level and ready for real conversations that move people. I'm Michelle Markman, and this is Quiet Power Talks, and I have Haje Kamps here with me.
Awesome.
So
Thank you for
I'd love
having
to
me.
have you, yeah, I'd love to have you introduce yourself.
Yeah. So, what would you like to know?
Tell us who you are, what you do.
Yeah. So, my name is Haya. I have had the world's weirdest career. I have a journalism degree, swore I would never work in journalism, and then spent most of my career working in television and journalism. Um, and I've always been bopping around doing all sorts of interesting things. I've been a pitch coach, I've been a policeman, I've done I've written 20 plus books about photography. I've been a pitch coach for a long time. Like, I feel like whenever I get excited about something, I drop in super, super deep, which, how very neurotypical of me.
Well, we're very happy to have you here. So let's begin with the real you. What's something about your story that people might not see from the surface?
Mm. I think like something that's really keeping me busy at the moment is I host a podcast about autism called Autistic FM. And when I tell people that, often they're very surprised and confused. They're like, wait, why do you care about autism? And I'm like, because I'm hella autistic. But I'm also extraordinarily smart, a decent actor, and very good at masking. And so I think it's really confusing how something that is that big and that present to me can be incredibly invisible to people. And it becomes this very weird, like double life type situation, which is extremely uncomfortable and a little scary to be honest with you, to kind of be effectively so good at masking, which is a good thing, that nobody sees me, which is a terrible and awful and painful thing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I can relate to that at least somewhat because I think whenever I have shared with people, they've either been completely shocked or they're not neurotypical and they're like, oh, yeah, I knew that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, once in a while, someone will not be completely shocked. So I don't know that I'm quite as good at masking as you are. But it's interesting. It seems like people have very preconceived notions of what autism is and what
Mhm.
autism is not. And when they see anything in the gray area, anything that's presenting a little differently, they just assume it's not autism.
Right.
And I think I even assumed that about myself when I got my diagnosis. I thought, there's no way. I read all the diagnostic criteria. It doesn't fit because I'm not a little white boy,
Yep.
but it's a spectrum. It really is. So, how did your lived experience shape the work that you do today?
Hmm. I think I hesitate to use the word superpower because it's incredibly overused, but my affinity is curiosity. And that means that I learn very, very quickly. And I've always been a technologist. I've always been very curious about technology. My approach to photography wasn't to make pretty pictures. It was just like, this is such a fun machine that I get to play with. And then it happens to make pretty pictures, but that wasn't actually originally the goal for me. Um, and so when new technologies come along, I often end up playing with them. And one of the newest technologies that I found an affinity for was artificial intelligence, machine learning. I did a machine learning course uh, that Stanford University published back in 2017. And it was always like really like curious and interesting and a little bit outside of my comfort zone. And then the current generation of AI came along and made it so much easier for people to play with it. Ended up building a whole bunch of toys and tools and little doodahs that I love doing. Like I built a tarot reader, so you can send a question and it does a tarot reading for you. Things like that, right? They're not complicated pieces of technology, but it's a really good way to kind of interweave technology with mysticism and storytelling. And when until recently, I was a consultant. I was helping startups raise money, and I did that company with a co-founder, and she passed away pretty suddenly. And I found myself really struggling. And by the time I kind of came out the other side of that grief, I mean, very optimistic. I don't think I'm done with it. But by the time it really let go of me, I was like, there's nothing left of this business. I need to find myself a proper job. And so now what I'm doing for a living is I'm the head of AI for a really interesting company, which I never saw myself in that role. Um, and, we have some very smart machine learning and AI engineers. But yeah, I feel like I have that weird in between space of being able to talk to engineers, being able to talk to product people, being able to understand what's happening with the AI side of things. And so I kind of find myself a translator between lots of different parts of the business. And it's a really fun and interesting place to be.
That's very cool. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that's helpful to everyone else who's kind of like you're saying, speaking different languages because they have a different understanding of how things function in the world. It's very cool that you're able to kind of bridge the gaps and translate for everyone.
Yeah,
I
cool.
definitely find that I'm a little bit of a translator between neurotypicals and neurodivergent people at times. So I
Yeah,
can relate to
I'm
that.
not surprised at all.
What values or principles guide how you show up in your work or your leadership?
Oh, goodness. I have such a strongly developed sense of justice. And that has at time gotten me into a lot of trouble. Like I'm very bad at letting things go. I'm a prolific online reviewer of stuff because man shakes fists at cloud is kind of my spirit emoji. Um, I think I believe, and that has evolved. I'm not as hardline black and white as I was in my 20s. And I think the interesting piece about that is that I started doing a whole bunch of workshops about love, intimacy, and sexuality. And I really grew to understand the language of what interpersonal relating is and what active listening is and what like really dropped in conversations with people is. And what I discovered is that that is pretty hard for a lot of people, but like all conversations are hard for me. And what I learned was like it takes me about the same amount of energy talking about something real as it talking about the weather. And if that is true, then I would much rather talk about something real. Like screw the small talk, let's go for big talk. And I think that's been a really important discovery about myself, and that is a really big value that I bring with me to business, to my work. I will ask people how they're doing and mean it. I will apologize the many times I screw something up. I will go out of my way to go like, hey, I feel like you're in this meeting, you haven't really been heard. Like, what do you wish the rest of us understood about what's happening here that you think you know and that nobody else does? Like, I like teasing that out of people. Um, and so I think the value that's there is just inclusivity, to be honest. It's like what's the point in having so many different voices if you only hear a small fraction of them? And that's where I get to flex my privilege, right? As a tall, relatively well-spoken, relatively well-educated white dude, like people turn to me all the time, and I'm like, well, I don't have answers. I have lots of questions. And if I can use that to direct people's attention to other voices, other places, that makes me feel like it's kind of worthwhile having me in the room.
That's beautifully said, and I think that's a really wonderful approach that you're, bringing other people out and encouraging them to use their voices as well, especially people with different voices, different backgrounds. I think that's really important. And I heard recently that neurotypical people communicate in order to connect and build relationships, whereas neurodivergent people communicate to share information.
Right.
So that whole little piece about you talking about how you'd rather talk about something important and big versus the weather because it takes so much more energy. I completely relate to that. And I think you're right. It really does take the same amount of energy to talk about the weather as it does to talk about something that's really important. So I always found that fascinating that there's so many sort of unspoken, expected to be known social norms out there that are just over our heads.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like playing with that too, kind of subverting expectation a little bit and like being experimental. I went on a cruise like last year, which I don't know about cruises, you guys, but I went on a cruise. My partner is a venture capitalist and had an opportunity to go along, and she was like, "Do you want to come with?" I was like, "Sure, I'll go." And you know, there was a lot of spiritual bypassing that was happening. People were like super woke, super understood everything, super everything. And then if you go slightly under the veneer, it was like, oh, this is all kind of. I like talking to people who have reached a conclusion because they've thought about it, not because it's kind of the hip cool thing to do. And as part of kind of my little counterculture push was like, okay, I'm gonna test this. And so for most of that cruise, the first question I'd ask people was like, when was the last time you cried? Or what grief are you processing right now? Or what is your greatest fear? What are you scared will happen? And a solid half of people basically just took a like held eye contact, took a sip of their drink, and then walked away. It's like, nope. And I was like, cool. That saved us both some time. But the people who were like, "Oh, I see. This is interesting. We're playing. This is a game. Let's play this game together." It became like, and I had some absolutely extraordinary conversations as a result. And so what my big learning there was is that people are willing, some people are willing to show up to big conversations, and that really delights me.
Yeah, I love that. And it is true. And it's a good way to kind of tease out who are closer to your people
Hmm.
who are not so close to being your people, regardless of where you are. Even on the cruise, you found people who were relatable.
Yeah.
So, what are you seeing in the world right now? What do you notice your clients, your community are struggling with most right now?
I mean, I'm an immigrant to this country. I live in California. I'm not from here. And a lot of my community is immigrants. And there's a lot of really scary stuff happening right now. And I really struggle with how self-righteous a lot of people can be around immigration when we weren't the first people here. You know, you have a whole population that we almost killed off that lived here well before Columbus turned up. And I'm like, who are we to chuck people out of this country? It's just, I don't know. I try not to think about it too much because if I try to think about it logically, I self-implode. I just completely lose it. Um, but it's very in the media. It's very to front of mind. It's very, I have a couple of friends who are dreamers who are like, I don't know what's going to happen to my status as a American citizen. Are they going to take that away from me? I've lived there my whole life. Am I going to get thrown out of this country? And a lot of the narrative is incredibly unnuanced and a lot of kind of underbaked thought. Like people reach the conclusion but haven't done like the logical steps to where they're going. Um, so that's incredibly present for me. On the flip side, the other thing that's also very present is that I see people having more and better conversations about mental health. And I think that is um, crucially important to solving a whole bunch of challenges in this country. Um, like, I don't think we have a drug problem. I think we have a mental health problem. I don't think we have a homelessness problem. I think we have a mental health problem. And I can repeat that sentence again and again. And the root cause is like generational trauma and mental health challenges. But, and I don't think that we're close to a solution by any stretch of the imagination. But I see some very smart people having some very smart conversation, and that's giving me a little bit of hope. Not a lot, but a little bit.
So my next question is, what do you think they truly need beneath all the noise? Do you think that's the mental health piece or something else?
So I grew up in Europe, and I'm really not used to privatized healthcare.
Mm.
And I have many stories about that in this country. Um, I don't know how to fix this problem. I really don't. But I think that largely is the problem, that somehow we are such big believers of the American dream that if you just work hard enough, you can make it. If you just work hard enough, you too can own a white picket fence and four dogs and a house or whatever the goal is. And I just don't think that is true. Like, if that was true, like, there's a lot of extraordinarily hard workers who should be doing a lot better than they are. But also, not everybody can work hard, And I'm sitting here, she's talking to a friend of mine who is extraordinarily burnt out, and she's like, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job, and if I lose my job, I'll lose my healthcare. If I lose my healthcare, I lose my therapist. I lose my therapist, I lose my mental health drugs. I'm like, wow, all of this is one big circle around productivity, and that's not really what humans are. We're not creatures of productivity or how much money we make. I think we're creatures of love. And like, it's so hard to live in a country where everything ultimately boils down to dollars. Um, I don't know if that answers your questions at all, but I'm just sitting here
Yeah,
rambling to
no,
myself.
it's true. These are important political points that are really pertinent right now too, you know?
Yeah.
If you could, how would you help people navigate these issues in a way that feels safe and sustainable? You could sort of wave a magic wand and just fix
Let me tell you
things.
something completely crazy. As a percentage of GDP, the UK spends about the same amount of money on healthcare as the US does, public healthcare. But in the UK, every person is covered. In the US, that covers only Medicare and Medicaid, and God knows what's left of those programs as we're recording this. And so it shows that, and the US economy is much, much, much bigger, so it should have better economies of scale. And what that means to me is that at some point somebody made a choice. And I think the time is ripe to have some real conversations about, hey, how do we want to live? How do we want to look after people? Um, this whole thing became a lot more political than I was planning it to be honest. I'm sorry. It's just kind of what was front on mind today.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's been it's been front of many minds, I think, with everything that's going on. Every day there's some new shocking piece of news that's just like we've lost some other piece. Like they recently I heard they took away WIC. So we're not feeding babies and their mothers anymore. I mean,
That doesn't seem important, does it?
it's just shocking. So
Yeah.
I understand why we've kind of gone on this path, and that's fine. We can continue with it.
Yeah.
Let's pivot a little bit to your inner process. What role has your body or your nervous system played in your personal growth?
Oh God. You sent me the questions. I should have known this was coming. Um, if I'm being honest, I only really discovered I had a body um about a year ago. Like, before that, I feel like there was two entities. There was the part of me that I feed and it occasionally goes for a run, and then there's the brain that does everything else. And the only time that I ever really bridged those two entities was during really strenuous exercise. Sometimes I would like really feel my body, or during eroticism. I'd be like really connected with someone, and I'd be like, oh, I get it. There's this body, mind, spirit, everything connection. And now we have something real that is happening here. And then about a year ago, I did an exercise where somebody had invited me. It was a really simple exercise called the horse and rider, where the invitation was for the horse, the head, to talk to the body. And I was like, hey, buddy, thank you for, being healthy. Yeah, yeah, everything's cool and wonderful. And then there was an invitation for the body to talk to the head. And I broke down in the most epic meltdown I have had in years. I was complete, and I have meltdowns regularly, but not really in public. I'm able to mostly kind of keep my shit together. And uh, I was inconsolable for a solid half hour to the point that I wasn't sure I could breathe. And that was really just from, I don't know what that was, but I have read The Body Keeps the Score before and since. And I think this was me finally checking in with my body. Hey, what's the score? And it took one look at me and was like, the score is 900 to nil, and we need to have a proper chat here. Um, and that was the beginning of a really long arc of therapy and psychedelic work and like really deep work with my friends. And, I found a lot of depth in energetic work, in what I like to refer to my parents as hippie shit. you know, Give me some crystals and some kumbaya and let's go. And I recognize that even in making that joke, I'm kind of deflecting because I don't really believe it myself, but it's working. And so I have to believe it. So my corporeal being feels very young, feels very inexperienced, feels very confused a lot of the time. Like I will happily go for 2 days without eating, not because for any other reason than my body just forgets that food is a thing. And eventually I faint and I go, oh, yeah, maybe it's time to do something about that. The medical name for that is alexithymia. I just don't recognize what my body is telling me. Um, and that's very embarrassing. But also like it's so weird to be so divorced from my own body. Um, yeah, was that an answer? I'm not sure. I kind of
Yeah,
got lost there.
no, it was. And I think it's quite common for especially the neurodiverse population to really struggle with interoception and with,
Mhm.
the messages from our body. And I would say also that many of us in the neurodivergent community and many people who just have grown up in our generation grow up with this separation of mind, body, and spirit. We don't
Mhm.
even really see ourselves as a connected or unified being. We see ourselves as the mind, and then we
Mhm.
have the body, which is a tool. And then we may or may not have spirit, and we may or may not have a spiritual practice, depending off if you're atheist or agnostic. You probably don't believe in spirit. And then those of us who are religious or spiritual or have done psychedelics or all of the above, we understand that there is a spiritual component. And, your spirit is literally what innervates your body with life. And when you
Mhm.
die, your spirit leaves, and that's when the life is leaving. But I think it's really super common for us to just be completely separated and have walls up, and especially in Western society between mind, body, spirit, because we're conditioned to believe that everything is disconnected. I mean, even if you go to a Western medical practitioner, if you break your foot, they're going to cast your foot and they're going to say, okay, great, here's your cast. We'll check on it. We'll take it off. You're all better. We'll do PT for your your foot cast, they're not going to look at the other side of your body because now your back's messed up because you've been walking funny because you were wearing a cast.
Hmm.
It's really all connected, and it's so easy to just kind of separate things and see things as separate when they are connected.
Yeah.
And I think it's
Yeah,
so
I love that.
important that people do the work, to really reconnect mind, body, and spirit.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. My
yeah.
mother was a physiotherapist her whole career, and her like rallying cry was, "Let's turn off the tap before we start mopping." Like, I'm not here to mop up the floor, i.e., deal with your symptoms while the tap's still running. And I thought that was such a maybe pretty ahead of her time way to be thinking. But it's also so profoundly common sense, right? It's like, let's
Yeah.
fix the thing that's causing the thing, then let's fix the symptoms.
Right. So, how do you reset or regulate when your life feels like it's too much?
Well, when I figure that one out, I'll give you a call. Like I don't really have healthy coping mechanisms a lot of the time. Um, I tried drinking too much. That didn't really work. I tried taking lots of baths, which is feels wonderful, like being cocooned in hot water and kind of reading a book or whatnot. But I recognize that that is really just pressing the pause button. It's not like getting back into recharge mode. Um, I think the honest answer is that I don't know yet. And I am like exercise, I can do it, but it doesn't make me feel good. Um, and there's a lot of things where I'm just like, I don't know what I need to do in order to feel more resourced. Um, and given that I'm currently in a stretch of pretty severe burnout, I wish I knew. I really wish I knew.
Yeah. So maybe taking more time to listen to your body, right? Since you just have sort of just started
Yeah,
to notice that it's there, maybe it needs you to listen more.
almost certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and that's a really helpful reminder. Thank you, Michelle. I think I do meditate a lot. And a really interesting thing that happened for me was that I became very good at finding the stillness. My inner monologue fell away, to the point that I don't have an inner monologue anymore, which is a very strange, yeah, it's a very strange flip. But that also means that it has, in some ways, become harder to relate to myself because the monologue is gone. Now I'm doing it entirely non-verbally, which feels more accurate but is more vague. Um, yeah, I love the peace and quiet of meditative space. I love waking up in the morning, recognizing that I've woken up and telling myself, Hiya, there's nowhere you need to be. You can just enjoy the warmth of this duvet, the sounds outside. And that becomes like a meditative practice because I know I have about 20 minutes before my brain kicks online. And when it does, it's not going to stop until many hours later, right? But just being present with and aware of that little stolen moment of peace. Um, and the thing I've been experimenting with recently is trying to extend that moment into my day. So instead of just being in bed for 20 minutes and just kind of enjoying the warmth, being like, okay, what would it be like to take this depth of presence and mindfulness into making coffee or into maybe even interacting with other people that I've never been able to do. So that's kind of it's if I'm in my own little cocoon, I can hang on to it, but in interaction with others, that becomes tricky.
Mhm. And is that because the masking kicks on, do you think? Or is it just,
I have never thought about that, but that may very well, I think that might be it. And I think you just answered a really interesting question I didn't even ask you. So thank you.
you're welcome.
You should be a coach or something.
Funny you should say that. We'll get to that later. So let's talk about the bigger picture. What are you most passionate about changing in your industry or your community?
I mean, Autistic FM is a podcast. I just put out episode number 40, which, holy cow, how did I get to 40? But the original idea for the podcast was to create a guide to help neurotypical people love autistic folks better. It's like this is a guide for friends, maybe coworkers, definitely lovers. Like what would it be helpful if other people knew about me that I'm struggling to put into words? And say, hey, read this book. This helps explain how I work. And when I started writing the book, I was like, wait a minute, this is only my perspective. And this is a spectrum. My perspective is that of a late diagnosed 40 something white dude. That's not helpful for everybody. So what if I started interviewing a bunch of people? And I did. And some of those interviews were like the first 3 or 4 interviews I did, like people were always crying. And I was like, whoa, something real is happening in these interviews. And I'm not actually sure what that is, but it would be a shame if it just lived on a drive on my computer and it got like used as a single paragraph in a book. There's such depth and richness here. And then I was like, wait, this is a podcast. And so that's how the podcast started. So I think what I want to do in my community is to help highlight the many different ways that people are autistic. The, the coping skills, coping mechanisms, the diagnosis versus not diagnosis. And I think what that boils down to is really helping carve out a slice of the double empathy problem. It's like, let's invite neurotypical folks into our world a little bit more, given that we kind of live in their world the whole time. Don't know if that's my life mission, but it's definitely something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, talking to people on the podcast about, reading about. It's definitely become a special interest.
I love that. And what legacy do you want your work to create?
I When I was a kid, I was like, how do I think about legacy? What do I want? And I was like, okay, I want to have written a book. I want an IMDb entry because I worked on a film, and I want to invent something. Um, by the time I was 22, I had done all of it. And I was like, wait, does that mean that my life is over? Like, have I done all my goals? Um, and so now I'm like, I think I would be very happy to not really worry about legacy, but to worry about impact. Like, I don't need people to know my name. I need people to, like, if I can put a little dent in the world that makes life better for a small group of people, awesome. Sign me up. Let's do that.
Yeah, I love that. And that is a legacy, you know,
Right.
making change. It's
Yes.
great.
Yeah.
So, where can people find you and stay connected to your work? Where can they find your Autistic FM podcast?
Thank you for asking. I'm super easy to find online. Haje. I'm like first name. You can find me everywhere. Autistic FM lives on autistic.fm. And yeah, listen to an episode. There's a lot of really wonderful, thoughtful guests who've shared it's changed my life, some of the conversations I've had. So may it also change yours if you want that.
Awesome. Now I'm just going to extend a quick invitation for our audience. If you're watching this and you're feeling a pull towards deeper clarity, grounded energy, and a safe, powerful decision-making space, I want to personally invite you to Momentum Reset. This is a 2-week clarity intensive where we get together and we pull apart What is keeping you stuck? What's keeping you in fight, flight, or fawn? And what's stopping you from moving forward in your life, your business, and in building your legacy? And right now, for summer only, I have it discounted by 40% to 297. It's normally 497, so it's 40% off. I will link the details below this. And thank you again, Haye, for this wonderful interview. It is always a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you for having me. This was wonderful.